Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're continuing with the next part of this epic time chamber series. My name is Ash. Please, for me, drop a like, join the Patreon, and subscribe to the page. Also, leave your comments down below. With that, let's begin.
Cross my heart and hope to die. Welcome to my dark side.
The demon's words lingered in the air, thick and oppressive like a storm cloud ready to burst. His grin widened, revealing teeth that seemed to gleam unnaturally, as if he derived true pleasure from the chaos he promised. The certainty in his tone, the malevolent gleam in his eyes. This wasn't idle talk. Azazel's thirst for destruction was palpable, and it sent a chill through the group. The Z-Fighters exchanged uneasy glances, each silently calculating their next move. Their resolve was strong, but this foe was unlike anything they had ever faced. No one dared break the tense silence, except Chi-Chi. With a sharp intake of breath, she stepped forward, her fists clenched so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Her fiery determination burned brighter than her fear, and her voice quivered only slightly as she addressed the demon. "You think you can scare us into doing what you want?" she snapped, her words laced with a venomous fury. "Not a chance." Azazel's mocking tone cut through her defiance. 3 seconds, that's all you get," he said with deliberate slowness, drawing out every syllable as if savoring his dominance. 1, 2, "You don't get to make demands here," Chi-Chi shouted, her voice slicing through his countdown. She planted herself directly in front of Piccolo, her small frame almost laughably dwarfed by his imposing figure. Yet her presence was anything but insignificant. "Piccolo's staying. Do you hear me? He's family, and we don't abandon family. You'll have to go through me first." Bulma smirked, stepping beside her with folded arms. "Chi-Chi's got a point," she said, her tone light but unwavering. "But unnamed husband, huh? Now that's a plot twist. Goku's going to love this one." Piccolo shifted uncomfortably, his green complexion darkening to a deeper hue. "Focus, Bulma," he said sharply, though his voice carried a tinge of embarrassment. "This isn't the time for jokes." Azazel's grin vanished, his face hardening into something far more sinister. "Enough," he said flatly, his voice dropping into an ominous growl. "If this is the choice you've made, so be it." The air around him seemed to warp as his energy began to rise. The Z-Fighters instinctively braced themselves, their senses flaring. But then, nothing. No signature. No pressure. No trace of Azazel's power. At least, not to most of them. Piccolo's keen senses caught it, though, and what he felt made his stomach drop. His sharp eyes narrowed, his focus locking onto Azazel with the intensity of a hawk. The aura surrounding the demon wasn't just strong. It was otherworldly, immeasurable, suffocating. "His power, it's unreal," Piccolo muttered under his breath, beads of sweat forming on his brow. He forced himself to stay composed, though inside, his mind raced. Beerus, the god of destruction, was a force they had seen in action, terrifying, unmatchable. But Azazel, his energy might even surpass that. Azazel stood motionless, his arms still behind his back, his expression calm and unreadable, yet his aura was anything but tranquil. The atmosphere thickened, as though the very air was bending under the weight of his presence. His gaze bored into Piccolo, sharp and predatory, like a hunter studying its cornered prey. "Well then," Azazel said, his voice unnervingly soft, but carrying an edge sharp enough to cut steel. He tilted his head slightly, a faint glimmer of amusement flashing in his eyes. "Shall we begin?" Azazel's power surged, and for the first time, the group could physically feel the ground tremble beneath their feet. The fight was imminent. Azazel's movements were a blur, effortless, deadly, and far too fast for any of the Z-Fighters to track. One moment, he stood motionless, exuding a quiet menace. The next, he was inches from Krillin, his fist already in motion. Boom! The sound of the impact reverberated across the battlefield like a shockwave, rattling nearby trees and kicking up a whirlwind of dust. For a moment, it seemed as though nothing had happened. Krillin's body stood rigid, as if frozen in place. Then, like a delayed reaction in a lagging video game, his expression twisted in pain, and the force of the gut punch sent him rocketing upward. The sheer power behind the attack was staggering. Blood burst from Krillin's mouth in a gruesome spray, and his body sailed high into the sky, tearing through the clouds like a missile. "Krillin!" 18's voice broke the stunned silence. Her scream filled with raw panic. Without hesitation, she launched herself upward, her energy surging as she raced to catch him before gravity could claim its prize. She knew all too well that a fall from such a height would be lethal. But just as she reached for him, a hand shot out of nowhere. Azazel. His fingers closed around her ankle like an iron clamp, stopping her mid-flight. "And where do you think you're going?" he taunted, his voice calm but dripping with cruelty. With a casual swing, he hurled her downward, slamming her into the ground like a meteor. The moment her body struck, the earth trembled violently. The resulting crater was massive, a jagged wound carved into the planet's surface. At its center, 18 lay motionless, her energy flickering weakly as dust and debris settled around her unconscious form. Azazel barely had time to relish his handiwork before 17 materialized behind him. The android's speed was breathtaking, his appearance more like a flash of light than a physical movement. Without hesitation, he unleashed a spinning kick aimed directly at the back of Azazel's neck. Crack! The force of the blow was immense, its sound echoing like a thunderclap. Sparks of energy danced along the edges of 17's attack, creating a shockwave that uprooted trees and sent tremors rippling through the battlefield. Yet to 17's growing horror, Azazel remained unmoved, not even a flinch. "Was that supposed to hurt?" Azazel asked, his voice as calm as ever. He glanced sideways at 17, his expression more amused than annoyed. Frustration burned in 17's eyes, and he unleashed a relentless barrage of attacks, kicks, punches, energy bursts, each one faster and stronger than the last. His strikes tore through the air, their force scattering debris and leveling what remained of the nearby landscape. Buildings crumbled, trees snapped like twigs, and the wind howled with the sheer velocity of his movement. But Azazel didn't budge. Every attack met the same fate. Nothing. No matter how hard 17 hit, Azazel stood rooted in place, an immovable object against the android's unstoppable force. Word soul magic, stand still. The words came from Azazel, soft and almost dismissive, but their effect was instantaneous. 17 froze mid-strike, his body locking up as if bound by invisible chains. He struggled, his muscles straining against the unseen force, but he couldn't so much as twitch a finger. "What is this?" 17 shouted, his voice raw with frustration. "He hasn't even touched me. Why can't I move?" Azazel stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "It's simple," he said with a smirk. "You're a puppet now, and I pull the strings." Then, with a speed that defied comprehension, Azazel delivered a devastating sidekick. The force shattered 17's arm with a sickening crunch, the impact sending him hurtling through the air. His body tore through a Namekian house, reducing it to rubble, before slamming into a distant mountain. The collision was so violent that the entire peak seemed to quake, leaving a jagged scar in its wake. 17's body slumped at the base of the mountain, battered and broken. His energy signature flickered weakly, and it was clear he wouldn't be getting up anytime soon. Azazel stood in the center of the battlefield, his aura radiating supremacy, as if daring anyone else to step forward. The landscape around him was in ruins, a testament to the carnage he had wrought in mere moments. The Z-fighters were down, but his expression showed no signs of satisfaction, only boredom, as if this was nothing more than a warm-up. Azazel raised his hand, holding the mysterious artifact aloft. Its smooth, dark surface began to glow an ominous red, pulsating with a menacing rhythm as it hovered in the air above him. The atmosphere shifted, the air growing heavy and electric with raw energy. Suddenly, the artifact began to siphon the life energy from the fallen Z-fighters. Streams of glowing essence were pulled from Krillin and 17, their bodies jerking slightly as if in protest before going completely still. The horrifying realization struck Piccolo like a thunderbolt. "No!" he shouted, his voice breaking through the rising tension. The draining process was rapid and brutal. Within moments, the glow dimmed, and both Krillin and 17's life forces were gone, leaving their bodies lifeless. Azazel caught the flask as it fell back to the ground, inspecting it with a clinical detachment. The once red glow faded into a faint green. "Not quite full yet," he remarked, slipping the artifact back into his satchel with a satisfied smirk. "But close. A few more, and it'll be complete." Piccolo stared in disbelief, his mind reeling. He couldn't sense any trace of life from Krillin or 17. It was as if they had been erased from existence. "Krillin!" he called out desperately, his voice shaking. No response. The truth was undeniable, but Piccolo's heart refused to accept it. Nearby, 18's grief turned to rage, her fists clenched, her energy flaring wildly as she prepared to charge. 17! She screamed, her voice raw with pain and fury. She launched herself at Azazel, her speed fueled by sheer desperation. And stop! Piccolo's arm shot out, catching her by the shoulder and halting her advance. Are you insane? You can't defeat him. You'd just be throwing your life away. He killed them, 18 shouted back, tears brimming in her eyes. Her voice cracked under the weight of her emotions. My husband, my brother. You can't expect me to just stand here and do nothing. You have to think about your daughter, Piccolo said firmly, his voice steady despite the chaos. If you die here, she'll have no one. Krillin would never forgive me if I let anything happen to you or Marin. Take her, Chi-Chi, and Bulma, and hide. I'll handle this. 18's energy faltered as she stared at Piccolo, her emotions warring within her. After a long pause, she finally nodded, tears streaming down her face. You'd better make him pay for this, she whispered, her voice trembling. Piccolo didn't respond. Instead, he stepped forward, his gaze locking onto Azazel with a fiery determination. His body began to emit a radiant aura, and the ground beneath him trembled violently. Cracks split the earth as waves of power surged outward, shaking planet Namek to its core. The sky darkened, swirling with storm clouds as Piccolo's transformation began. Is that Piccolo? Murmured one of the Namekians, watching from a safe distance. The ground beneath their feet quaked, and they clung to one another for balance. He's so powerful. I've never seen anything like this. He's like a god. The junior elder guru stepped forward, his expression a mixture of awe and solemnity. Yes, he confirmed, his voice carrying the weight of ancient knowledge. Piccolo has achieved something extraordinary. He has fused with one of the mighty dragons. Shenron! Another Namekian exclaimed, their voice a mix of disbelief and wonder. The Earth Dragon? How is that even possible? Guru nodded gravely. Not only is it possible, but it has magnified his power tenfold. Piccolo is no longer merely a Namekian warrior. He is something far greater. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd. But isn't that supposed to be impossible? One of them asked hesitantly. A fusion of this magnitude, wouldn't it destroy him from the inside out? No Namekian body could handle that kind of power. You're correct, Guru replied, his voice steady but tinged with worry. Many have tried before, and all have failed, their bodies torn apart by the sheer force of the dragon's energy. The Namekians stood silent, their wide eyes reflecting both awe and fear as they recalled the history of the forbidden fusion. Long ago, when the Saiyans had first come to Namek, a bold warrior named Pu had attempted the same fusion. It was meant to grant him the strength to protect his people, but the power of the dragon had overwhelmed him, ripping him apart from within. Since then, it was accepted as a grim truth. No Namekian body could endure such power. The idea had been buried, deemed impossible, and never attempted again. Yet now, before their very eyes, Piccolo had defied that truth. Not only had he succeeded, but the transformation was breathtaking. Unbelievable, murmured one of the elder Namekians, his voice trembling. He actually did it. Guru, who had been quietly observing, finally stood. His frail form seemed to radiate a newfound strength as he addressed the crowd. This was always his destiny, he said, his voice carrying a gravitas that silenced the murmurs. From the moment Piccolo separated from Kami, his path was set. Every trial, every battle, it has all led him to this moment. He took a slow step forward, leaning on his staff, his gaze fixed on Piccolo's radiant figure. He will become the first god of the Namekians. Gasps rippled through the gathered Namekians. Their astonishment only deepened as Piccolo's transformation completed, revealing his new form, Orange Piccolo. His physique was more imposing than ever, his muscles carved with precision, and his skin glowing with a deep, fiery orange hue that seemed to radiate power. His antennae twitched slightly, and his intense gaze never wavered from Azazel. Piccolo shifted into his fighting stance, his body poised and ready. His aura flared around him, creating tremors that shook the ground beneath their feet. Azazel, he said, his voice steady and deep. This ends now. Azazel raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. Is that it? He said, his tone dripping with disdain. His crimson eyes scanned Piccolo, assessing the newfound power. To him, it was undeniably impressive on a mortal scale, but to a primordial being like himself, it was little more than a flicker in the vastness of his own strength. This is not nearly enough to fill the flask, Azazel muttered, almost disappointed. His eyes narrowed, and he spoke more to himself than anyone else. I suppose I should move on to Goku after this. The fool has already lost his divinity, but even in his diminished state, his power should suffice to half-fill the flask. He turned his full attention back to Piccolo, his expression sharpening into a cold sneer. "Well, no sense wasting time. I'll take your energy first." Azazel extended his hand, his palm facing Piccolo. "Come to me," he commanded. Before Piccolo could react, an invisible force yanked him forward, dragging him helplessly across the battlefield toward Azazel's outstretched hand. The demon's grip closed around Piccolo's throat, lifting him effortlessly into the air. The Namekian warrior struggled against the crushing hold, his fingers clawing at Azazel's iron-like grip. Azazel's smirk widened. "This is the best your kind has to offer?" he said mockingly. "Pathetic." Piccolo's eyes narrowed, and in an instant, his Kai flared to life. He summoned a concentrated blast of energy in his hand and fired it directly into Azazel's stomach at point-blank range. The explosion rocked the area, causing Azazel's grip to falter just enough for Piccolo to capitalize. Using the momentary opening, Piccolo swung his leg upward, planting his knee firmly into Azazel's chest. The force knocked the demon slightly off balance, and Piccolo flipped backward, breaking free of the grip and landing gracefully on the ground. Azazel straightened, brushing off his chest, as if the attack had been little more than an inconvenience. "You've got some fight in you after all," he remarked, his voice laced with mock admiration. Piccolo didn't waste any time. In a blur of movement, he closed the distance between them, his speed now amplified to a staggering degree. Before Azazel could react, Piccolo's fist connected with his face in a thunderous punch, sending the demon skidding backward. The force of the blow wasn't enough to launch Azazel far, but it was enough to make him stagger, if only for a moment. Piccolo dropped back into his fighting stance, his orange aura crackling around him like wildfire. His breaths came steady, his focus unbroken. Azazel slowly turned his head back to Piccolo, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, a chilling, predatory grin. "Interesting," he said softly, the air around him beginning to darken ominously. "Perhaps this won't be as dull as I thought." The air sizzled with tension, raw energy crackling across the battlefield. Every breath was a storm, every heartbeat a drum roll echoing through the vast expanse of Namek's darkened sky. Piccolo stood at the epicenter, his orange aura roaring like an untamed blaze, casting his towering frame in a fiery glow. His muscles coiled like springs, ready to snap into action. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, locked onto the figure before him, Azazel. Azazel, a terrifying contrast, exuded an almost unsettling calm. His crimson eyes shimmered with faint amusement, his lips curled into a predator's grin that spoke of superiority and sadistic delight. His dark cloak fluttered slightly in the residual energy swirling around them. He tilted his head, his voice a guttural growl, yet oddly composed. "Show me," Azazel commanded, his tone carrying an undertone of mockery. "Show me why you believe you stand a chance against me. Show me the glimmer of hope you cling to, so I can snuff it out." Piccolo didn't reply. He didn't need to. Instead, he roared, the sound echoing like a battle horn. With explosive force, he launched himself forward. The ground beneath his feet shattered, sending chunks of rock and debris flying in all directions. In a flash, Piccolo was upon Azazel, fists blazing as he unleashed a relentless flurry of strikes. Each punch was a symphony of violence, each kick a hammer blow to the planet itself. His attacks were precise, calculated, aiming for weak points on Azazel's head, torso, and limbs. The force behind every blow could have leveled mountains. Shockwaves radiated outward, distorting the air and shaking the very ground. Azazel, however, moved with the grace of a phantom. His defenses were impeccable. He parried Piccolo's right hook with a flick of his wrist, sidestepped a devastating knee aimed at his ribs, and leaned back just enough to evade a crushing elbow strike that would have collapsed his jaw. His motions were fluid, almost lazy, as though he were toying with his prey. But Piccolo wasn't finished. Pivoting sharply, he spun low, his leg slicing through the air in an attempt to sweep Azazel off his feet. Azazel leaped effortlessly, a smirk playing on his lips. Yet Piccolo anticipated the move. With lightning speed, his arms shot out, grabbing Azazel midair. "Got you!" Piccolo snarled, slamming Azazel into the ground with a thunderous crash. The impact was cataclysmic. The earth quaked as a massive crater formed beneath Azazel's body, dirt and shattered rock exploding outward in a violent storm. Piccolo didn't let up. Raising both hands, he summoned his ki, the energy glowing fiercely between his palms. "Take this, you demon!" he bellowed, firing a rapid succession of ki blasts directly into the crater. Each explosion roared like thunder, the bursts lighting up the battlefield in fiery brilliance. The force of the attack rattled Namek to its core, waves of energy rippling through the atmosphere. When the last explosion subsided, silence fell. Dust and smoke filled the air, obscuring the massive crater. Piccolo hovered above it, his chest heaving as he caught his breath, his sharp eyes searching for any sign of his foe. The tension was palpable. Then, cutting through the haze, a voice emerged, calm, mocking, and chilling. Pathetic. The smoke cleared, and there stood Azazel, completely unscathed. His dark aura crackled around him like black lightning, each arc humming with raw, unrelenting power. His smirk widened, his crimson eyes narrowing in derision. Is that truly the extent of your power, guardian of the Namekians? Azazel sneered, his tone dripping with disdain. I expected more. If this is all you're capable of, then I'm afraid there is no hope for you. Piccolo gritted his teeth, frustration surging within him like a raging storm. Sweat trickled down his face, his mind racing. How's this possible? He thought. Even in my orange form, he's still treating me like a warm-up act. No, I am hurting him. My attacks are landing. They have to be. He's just hiding the damage. He clenched his fist, his aura flaring even brighter as he forced himself to push aside doubt. This wasn't over. Not yet. He wouldn't let it be. Azazel, however, seemed bored, his smirk unwavering as he took a casual step forward. The battlefield quaked violently as Piccolo raised both hands, channeling every ounce of his energy into a glowing, pulsating orb. The light from the attack illuminated the battlefield in brilliant hues of orange and gold, casting long, jagged shadows across the scarred terrain. The air around him grew heavy, vibrating with the sheer intensity of his power. The ground beneath his feet cracked and trembled, unable to bear the force he was summoning. With a primal scream, Piccolo hurled the massive energy orb toward Azazel. It tore through the air like a meteor, its light carving a fiery trail as it closed in on its target. Azazel didn't flinch, his crimson eyes locked onto the incoming attack with cold precision. At the last possible moment, he extended a single hand, palm facing the orb. The massive attack came to a dead stop mid-air, quivering violently as if resisting an unseen force. Azazel smirked, his fingers curling slightly as he took control of the energy. With an almost casual flick of his wrist, the orb spun around and rocketed back toward Piccolo. What? Piccolo's eyes widened in shock. He barely had time to react. Crossing his arms in front of him, he braced himself as the attack slammed into him with earth-shaking force. The explosion that followed was deafening, a wave of smoke and debris engulfing the area. Piccolo was thrown backward, skidding across the ground before coming to a stop amidst the rubble. As the dust began to settle, his silhouette emerged. His arms were singed, the skin blackened and charred, but already beginning to heal thanks to his regenerative ability. His shirt had been incinerated in the blast, leaving only his pants intact. Azazel stood unmoving, watching Piccolo with an almost playful expression. Not bad, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. But you're still weak. Why struggle so much when you're not going to die anyway? Piccolo's aura flared to life once more, his energy surging with renewed determination. He gritted his teeth, his fists clenching as he prepared to charge. I don't need to die to stop you, he growled. In a flash, Piccolo rushed forward, his movements a blur of speed and precision. His fists and feet became a relentless whirlwind of strikes. He threw punch after punch, each one aiming for a vulnerable spot. Azazel deflected most of the blows, his hands moving with almost surgical precision. But Piccolo's attacks weren't just brute force, they were calculated. A powerful punch connected with Azazel's ribs, the impact echoing like a cannon shot. A knee followed, driving into Azazel's stomach, causing the primordial being to grunt slightly. Then came a devastating kick to the side of the head, sending Azazel staggering a step to the side. For a moment, it seemed like Piccolo was gaining the upper hand. His strikes had weight, force, and precision. Each one left a ripple of energy in the air, and the ground quaked beneath their feet with every exchange. But the brief glimmer of hope was snuffed out in an instant. Azazel caught Piccolo's fist mid-strike with a sharp, calculated movement. His grip was ironclad, twisting Piccolo's arm and forcing the Namekian to his knees. Down, boy, Azazel commanded, his voice laced with mockery. Piccolo struggled, his muscles straining as he tried to break free, but Azazel's strength was overwhelming. His free hand began to glow with a dark, malevolent energy, tendrils of black lightning crackling around his fingers. You struggle well, Azazel said, his tone dripping with disdain. But all your strength, all your determination, It's meaningless against a primordial being like me. The dark energy surged forward, slamming into Piccolo's chest like a tidal wave. The force was unimaginable, hurling him through the air. Piccolo's body collided with a nearby mountain, the impact shattering the rock face and sending massive boulders tumbling down. Lava seeped from the fractured surface, the planet itself reacting to the sheer power on display. For a moment, Piccolo's body was motionless. Then, with a grunt of effort, he pushed himself back to his feet. His breathing was ragged, blood dripping from his mouth, but his fiery determination burned brighter than ever. "I'm not done yet," Piccolo growled, his voice rough but resolute. His aura erupted once more, brighter and more intense than before. The ground quaked violently as his energy surged, cracks forming beneath his feet as the planet seemed to tremble at his power. "I will defeat you," Piccolo roared, spreading his arms wide as he began charging his most devastating technique. His voice echoed across the battlefield, filled with both anger and unshakable resolve. "I made Goku a promise to protect everyone, even if it cost me my life." The energy between his fingers spiraled, a sharp, concentrated beam forming at the tips. The air around him shimmered with heat as his ki condensed to its most lethal form. Special beam cannon! And that's it for today's episode, guys. If you watched to the end, then that could be an indication that you enjoy the series. So please leave a like on the video. Thank you and take care.